From Diamond Pharmacy Services, this is PodcastRx, a monthly show that takes you behind the counter of the nation's largest correctional pharmacy provider. We bring you conversations with pharmacists, nurses, managers, and other Diamond staff about the topics and issues we see in corrections, long-term care, and community health settings. Our chats aren't limited to purely pharmacy topics, and they aren't strictly clinical either. So if you're a healthcare provider or just enjoy healthcare podcasts, we think you'll enjoy this show. On this episode, Dr. Deborah Milito, Director of Skilled and Consultant Services for Diamond Skilled Division, returns to answer a fresh round of frequently asked COVID-19 vaccine questions. We delve into common queries about boosters, children's vaccines, natural immunity, and more. And we also briefly chat about her recent experiences leading the Diamond Strike Force immunizers, along with her appearance at the recent ASCP annual meeting. I'm Adam Campbell. This is PodcastRx. Dr. Deborah Milito, it's so good to have you back on the show for, I believe, a fifth time now. And you're always a reliable and enthusiastic contributor, and we appreciate you, so thank you so much.
You're very welcome. It's my pleasure.
So in your last couple appearances on PodcastRx, you answered some frequently asked questions about the COVID-19 vaccines. And since your last appearance on the show 4 months ago, there's been many changes with the vaccines. And naturally, that's prompted a whole new crop of frequently asked questions that we'd like to ask you. I want to get to those in a few minutes. But first, I'd like to talk to you about Diamond Pharmacy's own efforts with the COVID-19 vaccination efforts, the Strike Force immunizers. Can you give us a refresh on who the Strike Force immunizers are and what the team's been up to in the past few months?
Well, we have been extremely busy since about a year ago. My Strike Force immunizer team is comprised of senior care pharmacists that have become certified or were certified to give immunizations, as well as some nurses that, of course, can give immunizations.
Are you serving more homes now, more facilities?
So when we first started with the Strike Force immunizer team, it was basically to get either immunization 1 or 2 into the arms of our seniors and the healthcare workers at our long-term care facilities. But now that has morphed into the booster doses, and now there's going to be a federal mandate that will require the healthcare workers that are unvaccinated to get vaccinated. So every time we think that we're caught up, something else comes down the road.
Yeah. With the homes that you've been working with in facilities, is there a large degree of unvaccinated staff right now?
Yes, there is. The resident vaccination rates are very good. They're beyond 80%, and in most cases in the 90% range. For healthcare workers, unfortunately, we're hearing 45%, 62%. We need to get that to 80%. That's the goal.
Absolutely. As far as your own experiences with this, so what seems to be the hesitancy, the main driving factors of hesitancy among the staff?
What I hear the most are questions about fertility. Do the vaccines cause infertility? And the answer to that would be no, they do not. It is not a live vaccine. You can't get COVID from getting the vaccine. And as a matter of fact, all the different FDA, CDC, those regulatory bodies all recommend that if you are trying to get pregnant, if you are pregnant, or if you are lactating, you should be getting the COVID vaccine.
And I believe that's a frequently asked question we hit on the last episode with you about pregnancy and the vaccines. So it's very interesting. That's a factor that's keeping people from getting vaccinated.
Yes, and it's really more dangerous to contract the COVID disease if you were trying to get pregnant, or if you were pregnant, there could be complications with the baby. So we just want to protect everyone as best we can.
Absolutely, and we appreciate the efforts of the Strike Force immunizers in doing that.
Thank you.
Now, switching from COVID vaccines, we'll get back into that really quickly, but you were just at the American Society of Consultant Pharmacists annual meeting in San Diego, and anyone who's listened to this show with you knows how deeply you're involved with that organization. So I just wanted to ask, how was the experience this year? Did you give any presentations, anything of note?
So, San Diego is everything they said it would be. It was 72 every day. But what catches you by surprise is that it is cool in the morning and it is cool at night. So if you have a chance to get away from the conference a little bit and stick your head out the door, it's really 72 degrees. Yes, Adam, I did do a presentation. I actually was on a panel, and it was immunization stewardship. And my hour was devoted strictly to the COVID-19 vaccine. And then I had another panelist that talked about the other vaccines, like influenza and herpes zoster vaccines that would be used for our seniors. And then I had a third panelist who talked about the role of the senior care pharmacists in an immunization clinic. And then our fourth panelist talked about different regulatory issues.
That's excellent. I think you've been doing panels now for this past several years at these annual meetings.
Yes, I think this is the fifth one, and usually it's antibiotic or antimicrobial driven. But this year, because of everything that's been going on with COVID, we made it an immunization workshop, which is under the auspices of an effective antimicrobial stewardship program, because that program would include infection prevention and control and immunizations.
Yeah. Then how fitting, of course, that we have you back on to talk more about those vaccines. Everything's very top of mind for you. You were joking with me before we started rolling the tape here. How does she do it without notes? That's what I would ask. But I know that this is what you talk about all the time. So again, thanks again for sharing all that expertise with us. So now we'll just get right into it, get into these new crop of frequently asked questions about the COVID-19 vaccine. So I figured we should start with the booster shots. The last time we talked with you, the booster shots hadn't been rolled out yet. So first of all, what are the current guidelines for a booster shot and who's eligible?
So the first company that was approved for booster would be Pfizer. And shortly after that, it was Moderna and then Janssen, whichever way you want to pronounce it. The criteria for the booster is for the 2 messenger RNA vaccines that after you've received the primary series, which would be the first and second dose, you wait 6 months and then you get the booster. The people that are qualified to get that booster would be those 65 and older, or 18 to 64 if you're at risk for different comorbidities, or at risk because of occupational exposure. For the Janssen vaccine, it is 18 and older, and it's 2 months after you had the first dose, reminding everyone that there's only 1 dose of Janssen, and then in 2 months you can get the booster.
I've been seeing some news stories suggesting that these guidelines could be expanded to include anyone who wants a booster. How likely is that in your view?
I think that's very likely. I think it's going to be 18 and older. Go get your booster.
A quick editor's note here. We recorded this episode just a few days before the CDC's November 19th announcement that booster eligibility would be expanded to all adults ages 18 years and older interested in receiving a booster shot. So Deborah's answer, while speculative at the time, was right on the money. Back to the show.
And the reason we want that to happen is that, just with the immunity process in our bodies, it does wane over a period of time, and we're seeing that that's probably at about 6 to 8 months. And also to protect us against the Delta variant. So at no time does anyone have to think that that if they don't get vaccinated, that they'll get the disease. You may still get the disease, but it will not be as serious as if you didn't get vaccinated. So, for instance, getting fully vaccinated, which are the 2 of the primary series, and then waiting 2 weeks after that, you are considered fully vaccinated. The booster is just because of waning immunity and the Delta variant. So a lot of people get a little confused about when you're considered fully vaccinated. And it's after the primary series of either Moderna or Pfizer, or after the first dose of the Janssen. Wait 2 weeks, you are fully vaccinated.
How do the boosters work in comparison to the original dose, the original full dose?
So the fully vaccinated dose would be the 2 doses of Pfizer, 2 doses of Moderna, or 1 dose of Janssen. And as I stated that, after a period of time, which is maybe 6 to 8 months for the messenger RNA vaccines, that we do have a waning of immunity and the Delta variant, that it would be important to get the booster dose. And I would like everyone to remember that we have many other vaccines that we've used in the past that this is the same concept, such as hepatitis B. A lot of us that are listening to this would have received hepatitis B, and that would be, say, today you would get it, in 2 months you would get another dose, and in 6 months you get the 3rd dose. So this is no different. You don't get hepatitis B repeated. Once you do it, you're finished. So we think that's what will happen with COVID as well.
An interesting development with the boosters is that you can mix and match. So if you got the Janssen vaccine or the Pfizer Moderna for your original dose, you can mix between. How's this possible?
So when the vaccines first came out, they said if you get 2 Pfizer, you stick with Pfizer, 2 Moderna, or 1 Janssen. And then we had the immunocompromised individuals that were in between the primary series and the booster dose, and that was called the 3rd or additional dose. And for those people, if they couldn't get a 3rd dose of Pfizer, they had gotten 2 primary series, and they just weren't in a location to get a 3rd dose of Pfizer, they were permitted to get the Moderna. So that was something that we sort of saw back with the immunocompromised. But the general rule to follow is 2 Pfizer get you another Pfizer, 2 Moderna get you a Moderna, and Janssen. But then when the booster came out, what the CDC Advisory Committee of Immunization Practices, or ACIP, decided, they decide the populations of the pretty much who, what, when, and where get the vaccines. And they said it might be difficult for people to find the booster that they want based on what their primary series was. So you could mix and match. And that's also called heterologous. And so you have 2 Pfizer, you could get a Moderna booster. You had 2 Moderna, you could get a Pfizer booster. You had a Janssen vaccine, you could get either Pfizer or Moderna as a booster.
You kind of spoke to this already, Dr. Milito, but if you don't get a booster, how protected are you by your original vaccine dose? Keeping everything in mind with what you said, what's the efficacy remaining?
That's debatable. We know that with the primary series, we were approaching 93 to 95% effective. But we're seeing that vaccine efficacy, otherwise known as VE, does decrease over time. So it will be very important to get a booster.
Are there any new side effects with the boosters?
No, the side effect profile, although I like to call them immune responses, are pretty much the same. You could have a localized reaction, such as a sore arm or a redness of the arm. And I always recommend to put a cold pack on or to take some acetaminophen or ibuprofen. We also have the systemic side effects that could occur, such as malaise or fatigue or headache. And again, over-the-counter preparations. And, I always say, just take good care of yourself after you get the vaccine. You've done such a good thing. Now it's time to, some me time and just kind of take it easy.
Definitely. And you've also spoken to this in a way, but my last question in this segment is, with the boosters, is this just going to be a regular procedure, kind of thinking like software updates in a way, or will it be going forward that the COVID vaccine process is like the flu vaccine process, seasonal, you get a new shot every year? How do you look at that?
Adam, the way I see it right now, and everything with COVID is very dynamic, but I think that it will not be like the flu. I think that we will not have to get it every year. I think if we get our primary series, if you're immunocompromised, you get that 3rd or additional dose, and then everyone get a booster. I think that may bode well and may be all that we have to do.
Remember the Diamond Drug Information Center? That group of expert pharmacists who help Diamond customers with their medication questions? Well, I'm here to tell you that they're a thing of the past, but not in a bad way. No. The Drug Info Center has a new name and a new mission. We're proud to introduce the Office of Pharmacy Therapeutics and Integrated Clinical Services, or Optics. Instead of offering just drug information, the pharmacists of Optics are moving their services closer to direct patient care. Whether it's through collaborative formulary management, medication therapy management, or individual patient care plans, the Optics team is ready to integrate their clinical pharmacy expertise into the day-to-day operations of medical teams in corrections and long-term care, and they'll continue to offer the same drug information resources they've provided in the past. To get a clearer view of Optics and its mission, go to diamondpharmacy.com/Optics team to learn more. Now back to PodcastRx.
We're back on PodcastRx talking to Dr. Deborah Milito about the COVID-19 vaccines, asking some frequently asked questions. So, Deborah, children are now eligible for vaccination. That's another big development that's happened since we last spoke with you. So what are the exact eligibility requirements for children?
This is for the Pfizer vaccine, and it's for 5 to less than 12. And it's a third of the adult dose, so it's 10 micrograms instead of 30 micrograms. It's also packaged in a different colored vial. It has an orange cap. And also there's a different buffering agent in the children's formulation, so there is a longer shelf life of the children's vaccine. It's highly recommended to give to that age group. And I know that a lot of schools are having clinics to try to get as many children vaccinated as possible and as quickly as possible.
You actually answered the next two I had here. One of them was which is currently approved, Pfizer, and what are the differences, which you just elucidated all those. Going back to side effects or immune responses, as you like to call them, anything unique to children with the vaccine that's currently approved?
Pretty much mimics what the adults experience. And keep in mind that the items that I did already mention about side effects are the same for most vaccines. So what they found was that the COVID vaccines didn't have people reacting any differently than they do to flu or to the Shingrix or to tetanus and diphtheria. It's pretty much the same across the board.
Right now, it's just the Pfizer vaccine that children can get. Are the other major players in the vaccine world looking to get theirs? Is this emergency use authorization? That's another question.
Yes. For children, it is emergency use authorization or EUA. And yes, Adam, the other companies are going for approval for children.
Okay. What about vaccinations for children under 5?
Studies are ongoing for 6 months to those less than 5.
Okay, so still a ways out for that.
I don't think it's that far away. I think that we'll see it in the near future.
Okay. Very encouraging either way. It's just nice to see that everybody can get this vaccine now and just the progress of it. I think we recorded an episode about a year ago at this time when they were starting to roll everything out, and the progress in the time's just been nothing short of amazing.
We've learned a lot.
So just some general vaccination questions to finish us out here. Where does the FDA stand on full approval for the COVID vaccines? I believe there's just one that is fully approved. The other is still under EUA. Am I correct in saying that?
So it is the Pfizer vaccine, but the only full approval, which is called a biologic license application, or BLA, is for the brand named product in 16 and older, and it's called Comirnaty, which is a combination of COVID, messenger RNA, and some sort of community type of name. So that's the only one that is fully approved, knowing that Pfizer is going for full approval for all indications and all age groups, and Moderna is doing the same thing, and so is Janssen.
And I think it's worth revisiting this question. I believe we touched on it in the last episode, but for anyone who may be hesitant with the vaccine because of this quote-unquote full approval versus emergency use authorization, if someone asks you that question, what do you tell them to allay their fears?
So there are quite a few things that happened at the beginning of this COVID vaccine issue. One is that there were many participants that were involved in each of these vaccine trials, which is unheard of. It was 44,000 for Pfizer, over 30,000 for both Moderna and Janssen. And keeping in mind, if it was 44,000, that meant 22,000 received the vaccine and 22,000 received the placebo. That's an unheard of amount for a vaccine trial. Usually you get maybe 100, a couple hundred. So that was one thing. The second thing was the federal government paid $10 billion to these drug companies to research and to manufacture and distribute these vaccines. So the third part of this is that all three phases of the trial started at the same time because they didn't need to raise money in between phases and they didn't need to try to get more people signed up to be in the trials. So unprecedented times called for unprecedented action, and that's where was the beginning of Operation Warp Speed. And that was back in December of 20.
Yeah.
Hard to believe where we are almost a year later, but we've, as I said, have come a long way.
Yeah. And given everything what you just talked about, the level of oversight, the level of very public efforts that were there, this, for anyone who may be concerned about, a more conspiratorial element of it, it's like it's all out there. And the participation, as you said, was unprecedented.
Yes. So we try to allay the fears of people that think that this happened too quickly. I just gave you the reasons why it happened the way that it did. And we should be so grateful that we were able to have it happen like that. Or we might still be waiting for a vaccine.
Right. To go along with that, are there any other major pharma players in the vaccine game besides the big three that we've been talking about?
So AstraZeneca is a player, but their vaccine has only been available outside of the United States, specifically in Canada and some European countries.
Is it perform as well efficacy-wise as the others, or?
Yes, it would be similar to a viral vector such as Janssen's vaccine.
What does the data show on the protection of natural immunity versus that of the vaccine? That's oftentimes you'll hear people say, well, I had COVID, I don't need to get a vaccine. What's the clinical standing on natural immunity?
So I think we have to consider that all of our immune systems are different. And when someone says, I had COVID, I don't need to get the vaccine, the first question I always ask, were you tested? And if someone says no, well, then I question if they really had COVID. But if they say, yes, I tested positive, I then go on to explain to them that, it's dependent on so many different variables for this natural immunity concept. How sick were you? Was it mild? Was it severe? Were you in the hospital? Were you on a ventilator? Some of the antibodies that do form could protect us, but for how long? We wouldn't possibly know how long that would be. And plus, some of these antibodies are considered irrelevant. So the only way that you'll be sure of the immunity is to get the vaccine. So to answer your question, if you had COVID, should you still get the vaccine? And the answer is yes.
How common are breakthrough infections for fully vaccinated people?
Well, they can occur, and they occur because you're exposed to someone that has COVID, or it's a variant that you're exposed to. But if you've had both doses of your vaccine and the booster, if you were still to come down with COVID, it would not be the serious form of it. It would be more mild, and it would keep you out of the hospital. It would keep you off of a ventilator, and it will keep your name appearing on the obituary page.
To kind of close things up here, or to wrap things up here, I was curious, Deborah, are there any other medications in development or study right now that show promise in fighting COVID-19?
Yes, so very exciting information. I'll start with the monoclonal antibodies that have been with us since, again, last December. They were introduced in December of 2020, and they're given via IV infusion or sub-Q injection. So that has, as you can well imagine, limited the use in some cases, but it's also prevented a lot of serious disease. And it keeps people from going to the hospital because you're actually getting the antibodies to fight the disease. But those are all injectables. So what we were waiting for, anxiously awaiting the arrival of something oral that could be given once someone tests COVID or tests positive for COVID. So there is an antiviral that's being made by the company of Merck, and it's called molnupiravir, and it's given twice a day for 5 days for treatment of a positive COVID diagnosis. There's another product by Pfizer that would act pretty much the same way, and we're very excited for FDA to give probably emergency use authorization to these two products. So we think that will be coming very soon. And the only indication right now would be for the treatment of a COVID positive person in the community or in a nursing home to keep you from going to the hospital.
A question that I should have asked back when we were talking about natural immunity. If you've had COVID and you say, okay, I'm not messing around, I'm getting my vaccine now, how long do you have to wait after your COVID symptoms and all that have abated before you can get the vaccine?
So as long as you're not symptomatic, you may receive the vaccine. If you were one of the lucky people that received a monoclonal antibody, you have to wait 90 days to get your vaccine.
Well, Deborah, I want to thank you again for coming on PodcastRx and answering a lot of these very important questions. We certainly hope that it helps people who may be on the fence finally go and get that vaccine and, again, lift us all out of pandemic life one shot at a time. So thank you again, and I'm sure we'll have you on very soon.
Thank you.
This podcast features conversations with healthcare professionals. Their statements and opinions discussed herein are for informational purposes only. This podcast should not be considered professional medical advice and should not be used as a substitute for the advice of an appropriately qualified and licensed healthcare professional. Therefore, listeners must not rely on the statements made herein.
PodcastRx is a production of Diamond Pharmacy Services, the nation's largest correctional pharmacy provider. Catch our new episodes on Apple Podcasts, SoundCloud, Stitcher, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Please rate the show and leave us a review. And if you have a topic you'd like to hear about on the show, or you'd like to share your thoughts on an episode, you can email us at podcastrx@diamondpharmacy.com.